All right, so we will begin. Okay, so before we kind of get into anything, does anybody have any questions or anything they want to ask about or any comment about anything? Just kind of before we get started, and I'll kind of jump into a bunch of different things. Okay, so I guess Amber, you have a question?
Yeah. Are we gonna be getting assigned groups or something today? Because I saw that on the reflections it says group on like most of them.
Yeah, no, I should have taken that off. That's kind of a remnant, but just based on the size of the class and kind of how we do things now, I took that out. So you're good. I don't
All
think we'll
right.
need to
So we
do
can just go ahead and
breakout.
work on them.
Yeah, you can go ahead and work on them. Yeah, individually in terms of the assignment. Yeah, that should have been taken out. I thought I did, but they're probably stuck in there from an old assignment. So no
Okay, that's
worries.
the same
That's
question I
fine. I'm just
had.
wondering.
Yeah, so no worries. We're good there. The other thing too is I was going to use
Okay.
breakout rooms, but the group is small enough. I don't think we'll need to do that here either because there's only uh, seven of you who can, or six can participate in, or Kim cannot, but she's still here. It's because she's still at work on mandatory overtime, as I understand it. So uh, certainly that's fine. So there's a couple of things that I want to go over. So let me give you sort of the big picture of the things I want to talk about today, and then we'll start to get into them. So I do want to talk a little bit about the idea of critical reflection, and I did send you the last writing that I did. I write on a regular basis, and I post it and try to publish it out there on the internet. But I broke it down to show you that writing within the frame of what a critical reflection is, because I want you to be able to sort of see that and use that as a model. Some of you responded to it, and I appreciate the responses from anybody who did. So that was fine. Obviously, I'm sharing some of my own personal life in those things, but that's not a problem. And again, um, and this is important, no one ever has to share anything they're not comfortable sharing. So I am comfortable sharing this stuff. But if there are things in terms of reflection that you want to ever you feel are private, you keep them private. So I just want to be kind of clear about that. But you can still practice reflection on them on your own. So that's kind of one thing I want to go over. I want to talk about compassion. I got a number of things related to compassion that we're going to talk about. Um, and some things I even just found, I was kind of mucking around looking for stuff for class, seeing if there's anything else I wanted to pop in there. So we may have some time for some of those things that kind of have come up late. So we'll talk about the idea of compassion, what it is, so on and so forth, and we'll kind of go from there. The other thing I want to talk about, and probably where I'll start today, is to go back and look at the final assignment because it's related to reflection. And students have struggled in completing that assignment in the past, partially because I feel like I didn't really give them enough information about what reflection really was. So I want to spend more time on that. So I'm going to start from there. And so we'll do that. We'll look at my critical reflection and the contents. Then we will get into compassion. And then if we have time, there's some stuff related to well-being that I want to talk a little bit about. And there's a video that I found literally about 45 minutes ago that I'll probably add for you to watch. It's just a 13-minute video. I'll talk a little bit about it if we have time. But it's just what I kind of want to give you because well-being plays into compassion, and it's important in terms of your own personal professional development, but also it's important in terms of understanding um, how you can be a helper for somebody and some of the things that are helpful. Because one of the things you'll note if you read my reflection, of course, I'm going off tangent a little bit here, but it's who I am. But if you read my reflection, and we'll talk a little bit about this, I talked about the concept of hindering. And this is something that I have found of interest really in the last few months. I've been doing some studying and reading about it, and I think there's a lot of truth to it that sometimes when we think we're helping, we're not. And it's not intentional necessarily. So it's not an intentional hindering, but it can function in that way. So I want you to begin to think about that. And we'll see how far we get with that today, too. So that's kind of an important piece. So before I go forward, any questions on anything I just talked about? Okay. Well, before I go any forward, I hope everybody had a good week. So I know it's your first full week at school and you're kind of getting back into it. So I hope it was a good week for you. And we'll kind of go from there. So let's go back to the assignment because this is important and something that you really should start working on kind of now. So I'm gonna open it up and then I'll share my screen. And you've probably seen this, and I'm guessing you read through it. I'm hoping you read through it. So, but I think it merits some more time. So I'm opening it up. I will share my screen. If I can get to the share screen. Here we go. All right, so you should be able to see this is basically the assignment, and it is just kind of right there for you. So it's a reflective paper. And so the idea of the reflective paper is to take things that happen in class each week. And so you can go back to last week, but we didn't really talk a lot about it for last week. But really starting from this week's class and materials, and I want you to find something that you can kind of reflect on. Now, the assignment kind of breaks down what reflection is using slightly different language than we've used before, but they're really the same kinds of concepts. So we'll talk about that. So what you really want to do is as you're in class, as you are doing some of the reading, watching some of the videos, I want you to have a notebook. I always keep a notebook by my desk. You can't really see it in that picture. It just fades in. This is really a notebook, I promise, that I have there. I wasn't holding up nothing. And whenever I'm reading or kind of doing my research and studying, watching video, I'm always taking notes on things that are striking to me. Sometimes quotes, sometimes, just kind of things that pop into my head about it, thoughts, ideas. And so I want you to do that and use that as the basis for the reflections that you're doing. So really having that notebook, and this is note taking with, someone said this or this was interesting or I was struck by that or whatever, right? It's not anything specific. It's really what strikes you. And so you really have to be attentive to that. I want you to be attentive to that. And then what I want you to do is to write about it in a reflective manner. And the final paper asks for writing 5 things that you learned or realizations you made during your time in the HUS program. So you can use what's in class, or if there's something that happens in one of your other classes that's striking to you, you can substitute that in there to write about. So I'm not sort of wed to what's happening in this class, but it is an assignment for this class. So I'm going to sort of prompt you to sort of use, if you can, what's in here. But if you're taking another class, like whatever case management or whatever other classes you might be taking, and something strikes you there, feel free to write about it. That's fine. The other thing that you can write about that I'll accept is some of you work already in the helping professions. I know some of you talked about this last week, and that's fine. So if something happens there that's striking, especially if it relates to something we talked about or something you're trying to use from your learning, that would be another thing that you can use to write reflectively about. And so, that's kind of what I'm looking for. And, these are some prompts that you can use to get you started. This is kind of the model that you use. But one of the reasons I shared with you my writing is for you to think about how you can write in that manner. Now, it's yours. You're not, it's not a copy of what I'm doing, but it's an example of kind of what I'm looking for. So I have, and I can post this. I have on a website called Medium. I have is where I typically post, and I think I have now 11 or 12 writings. So you can kind of take a look at my writing as an example. It is meant to be written. It is all reflective in nature. It's mostly reflective on my own personal caretaking journey and taking care of my 93-year-old mom who lives with us. But I sometimes write about other things too. So again, you can use that as sort of a model. And really, what I want you to do then is it's sort of like having five separate papers. And I'm kind of changing this a little on the fly with you because of things I've thought about and learned over time. And I didn't really have a whole host of time to sort of reframe the whole thing. But think about that. What you're sending me at the end of the semester is five types of reflections, much like my reflections. Now, my reflections are somewhere between 5 and 1,000 words. Yours don't have to be quite that long. You can do, try to do around 500 words, but you can thinking about the 300 to 500 word frame. Now, if you write a little more, that's fine. I'm not sure you can really write that much less and really get all this in there. So think about that as a minimum. So again, what I want you to do is this is about being attentive to sort of what's going on around you and what you're learning and what's striking to you. And then to process it using this kind of critical reflective strategy. Now, this will have a number of benefits for you, some of which you probably can't see right now. But one benefit is it will teach you the process because we learn by doing, right? It's kind of if you want to learn how to fix a car, someone can explain it to you and show you video and write about how it works. But until you actually get in the engine and start to pull the pieces apart or put them back together, you really are not engaged in the full process of learning. So this is a way to engage in that full process of learning. And again, I'm using my writing as the model for you, so you can kind of take a look at that. And again, so what you're doing is you're writing these kind of five papers and putting them together at the end of the semester and submitting them to me. So this is not the kind of assignment you can procrastinate to the last day of class. So fair warning, that won't work. So try to do one every week. There's 6 more weeks of class. This is due probably 1 week before class ends. If you do one a week, you should have it. And when you write, here's a couple of things that I would recommend. And I'll talk a little bit about my process because reflection is something you have to work at. The first thing you should do when you're writing reflectively, or really in general, is just get the idea out of your head. So what I do and what I would recommend that you do in terms of process is that just write it down. Don't worry about grammar, spelling, whether it makes sense, whether it's clear and all put together. Just get the idea out of your head and onto the paper. Then what I typically do is I'll play around with it a little bit to fix it up once I've written it once. But what I really do is I just put it away, and the next day I come back to it and I do my editing. So I'll read it and I'll just edit through the paper, kind of what it is, and I'll get it to say what I want it to say. Because now the idea is out there. I don't have to think about remembering what I thought about things. It's there. I will do things like even put bullet points in there. Remember this, remember this, remember this, remember this. I know that stuff is not going to be in the final product, but it's a way for me to kind of remember I may want to address that. The next day I come back to things and think, you know what? Reading it now, I think that's a bad idea. I throw it out. So again, think about writing in that manner. So always write a first draft and then refine it. So that's a good thing to do. Another tool that you can use that I have started to use is something called Grammarly, which you can download as an extension to your computer. And what it will do is, as you're writing, it will make suggestions about how to clarify your writing. So it's a tool, and it's not going to tell you what to write. It's not going to write the reflection for you. It's not going to really help you process your ideas. It's going to help with grammar and clarity of your writing. And actually, you can learn through that process because it will tell you, this is unclear, better clarity, whatever, comma here. So eventually, you'll get better at doing it on your own. So that's I think a really helpful process for you. You don't have to use that. That's just a suggestion. So it's something I've started to use, and I have found it to be of value. And so we kind of go from there. So do you guys have any questions about that? All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. All right, so no questions. That's great. So the next thing I want to do is I want to go back to a little bit to talk about this critical reflection. Now, we talked about it last week. I know there's a video in there. I know I did a video also kind of summarizing what we talked about in my own words in it. So I don't know if anybody has watched those. I know some people have because I go to YouTube, it tells me how many watches there have been. So, but these are all things for you as you're doing your work so that you, as you're sitting here, you can take some notes, but you don't have to remember everything. You can go back and watch the video and do whatever you want with it. So, that gives you sort of the class, you're in the class. And then obviously I put these up. You can rewatch the lectures and you can watch the videos that are up there. So there's lots of material for you to sort of, kind of get into this. One of the kind of stuff we're learning here too, and this is, I think, important, is you almost have to immerse yourself in it. So just to give you a sense of sort of my process in teaching this class, pretty much in teaching anything, but especially this class, is a lot of times what I'll do, and like what I did today, is this afternoon I sat down and I started to kind of make the notes. I have my notes here of kind of what we're going to talk about, what I want to talk about. But then I start to look at stuff related to the topic. So I just try to immerse myself in it to sort of get my mind into the thinking in this way. So that's a thing to do in terms of learning process. It's almost like jumping into a pool of the material without worrying about having to do things like memorize concepts and topics and definitions. It's just you're in that water of the topic and you're just letting it kind of swim around you. Or you're swimming around in it. That's probably a better way to put it. And just thinking about how it relates and putting it all together, because this is that kind of material, right? It's not like a math problem where you have to know, kind of how to do stuff. That's really bad. I'm not going to be able to give you a better example than that. But, math being a more sort of rational process, or even like when you take psychology and you have all these definitions and have to know these stages and all this. I'll talk about some of these things, but this is really about immersing yourself in this in a way that you process it. And you can use this reflection to process it. And I think what you'll find is you'll learn a lot. The kind of the way I look at this is when you get to the end and the class is done and you've been out of it for a week, you'll think back and think, that stuff is still with me because I spent the time to immerse myself in it as a whole. And it just will float around in your head. So, I'll let you choose to sort of see how you do that. But that's a good way to learn. Now there is a time for taking notes and understanding concepts and all that kind of stuff. I'm not saying you should never do that. And when I teach, we certainly do that. I don't know if anybody's taking the interviewing course in fall 2. I'll be teaching it. So we'll be talking about things that are definitely more focused on some things that are definitions and are more nice. So that's there too. So anyway, all right. Any questions about that? All right, so I'm going to pull up my writing. And again, for everybody that commented on it, I do appreciate that. But let me get to it. I got to find it here. Okay.
Sorry, I'm here. I'm sorry, I'm late.
Yeah, I got you. You're good.
Okay.
Welcome. Well, we're glad to have you. Glad you.
Okay.
Let me find my here. Okay, where did it go? I'm sure you guys are like this too. When you work, I've got like a million tabs open, two screens. Sometimes it's kind of a mess. All right, so let me share my screen again. So if you haven't read it, which I think a lot of you have, so what I did in here is I used that kind of 6-step kind of critical reflective process to identify kind of where you see it in the writing. And you can see it's in red. I put it in red for you. And one of the things I want you to notice is it doesn't have to be in order, right? You'll notice that there's description at the top, there's description at the top of the second page, there's analysis and evaluation, there's conclusions. Usually those will come at the end, but it's kind of all over the place. And so, the way I write, as I think about it, I'm trying to tell you a story, right? Reflection is about telling a story. And at least the way I kind of see it. I mean, pretty much everything is about telling a story. But so you don't have to be wed to sort of the order. Like I got to do the description, then I got to do the feeling, then I got, I mean, you can do it that way, but not necessary. So if you look at this, it starts off with a description, and I talk about it, and I do talk about my feeling, and I kind of analyze that. You see, I got a couple of those there. Then I evaluate, but then I go back to my feeling. So, just in terms of the way I wrote it, it's once I looked at it, it made me feel a second way, right? I had more than one feeling about the event now because there were other things happening. So once I reflected on it, it raised other emotions in me. So I wrote about them, and then I evaluated that. And then I went back to feeling again, right? Because there were other feelings that I had, in other words, in this case, it was like I was overwhelmed by it. There was too much dissonance. And so I just needed to step away from it. And the emotion was that feeling of being overwhelmed by the reflection, as I was processing it in my head. So I kind of wrote about that internal process that was going on. And then I kind of second description, because now what happened to me was the fact was that there was a second event that made me think about the first event, right? So a second description that was related to it, that to me, there was a lesson that I needed to learn from that. And so I described that, I did a little bit of analysis, evaluation, and then I drew some conclusions and an action. And what you'll note here, and I think this was interesting, not planned, but the action sort of was, it was speculative. In other words, it wasn't like I had a plan in my head. It was kind of like, okay, I'm not really sure what I've learned yet from this. I'm not really sure what the action totally will be. No, but I know that my action next time needs to be different, and it needs to relate to the way that I wrote about it. So, and that's okay, right? So don't think about the action like a plan, like next time when this happens, I'm going to do A, B, C, right? It doesn't have to be closed ended. If you remember, and you may or may not, but in the video by Joan Halifax, and I wrote this down somewhere, I want to get it correct. Not here, it's probably in my notes. Just bear with me here. let's see if I can find it. Hopefully I can. Of course I can't. Oh yeah. So she says we cannot be attached to outcome, right? So this is one of those cases where I was not attached. I'm not attached to outcome, but I'm attached to understanding the process. And when it comes up again, hopefully I'll be better prepared to manage it in a way that I'll get a better outcome. But I'm really not at this point sure exactly what I'll do. So that's kind of the process. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing. So what I need you to tell me is, do you understand this? And is this helpful in understanding when I talk about writing reflectively, what I'm looking for and what that looks like? So I need you to tell me this. And if you're unsure, that's okay. Try to we'll try to do some stuff with it, but help me help you. Help me help you understand. Help me understand where you're at this moment. Okay. So everybody's being shy. So I'm gonna have to call on somebody. All right. So I am thinking of, let's see. So okay, Chanel, give me a number from 1 to 7.
4.
All right. So that's really interesting. So what I'm doing is I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4 on my screen, and that's what I'm going to choose. And you know who I'm choosing based on number 4? Chanel,
Is it
you are
me?
4. You're right in the middle of my screen, and you're the 4. I'm not counting myself. So I'm skipping from Sharmista to Amber to Kelsey to you. You're number.
Wow, that's funny.
Yeah. So and I can only see you from the nose up. So if you can fix your
Oh,
computer.
my laptop is on my lap.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, so talk to me a little bit when you know, does this make sense to you? Are there questions you have about it? Help me out here.
So far so good. I think so. I think last example that you used, I think I looked at it, how you wanted us to like reflect on it. So I think I'm good.
Okay.
I think I'm okay.
I think you're
But of
okay.
course, I saw it after I submitted. I think I did mine a little off the last reflection that I reflected on with the videos.
Yeah,
But now I see though.
yeah, so with the videos, that's fine because we didn't
Okay.
really get into detail. This is really more about
Mm-hmm.
that final paper, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the final paper, because it's really kind of open-ended and amorphous, to use that term. And so, again, I know students sometimes struggle with this. They're always looking for, what do you want from me? What do you want in this paper? What do you want me to write about? How do you want to write it? So since this is reflective writing, which is really a little more, you're sort of using your creativity, and you're also kind of looking in the mirror at the same time. So, the form is here, but you get a lot of latitude about how you want to write it. But this is kind of what I'm looking for. So when I'm grading it, I'm going to look for this kind of stuff. Can I find these components? Can I find in it the description, the feeling, the analysis, the evaluation, the conclusions, the action, right? Can I find that?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to look for those components, but how they look will be different in all of your papers, and maybe different when you talk about, number A. There's no such thing as number A. You look at kind of, your first reflection example to your next one. They can be different, right? They don't have to follow the same flow, but you want to have those components in there. All right. So, Jaleesa, give me another number from 1 to 7.
6.
6. You guys are good. You just picked yourself.
Okay.
You are number 6. You guys really need to be looking at my screen. So anyway, talk to me a little bit about what you're hearing here and kind of how you understand it.
I understand. I think it was really helpful for you to suggest for us to just like write things out to get like our ideas out. and not really pay attention to the grammar or the structure. So yeah, overall, I think I'm pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's super good, right? The first draft, don't worry about, I mean, it's really just get it out there. If you're stuck and you're not thinking, don't think too much about how to write it, just get it out there because you can add and subtract. But what this means is that you really do have to do a draft and then a second, and then you have to go back to it. So I know sometimes students, they just like to write one thing and submit it. So I will be able to tell pretty much. I can't guarantee that, but yeah, I've been doing this for long enough to know when this is people didn't kind of put the effort in. This requires some amount of effort. The other thing that you can do is carry a little notebook around with you, not something like a big notebook. And if you're somewhere and you think of something that you think you might want to write about, just write a note to yourself. I thought about this. I just want to think about it. And that's a way to remember because I think about things a lot of times when I'm not around. So I'll make notes. I mean, I guess, and I do this. I send text messages to me. So that's another way I keep notes. I'll just send myself a text that says whatever as a way to remember. So, you gotta sort of be actively engaged in your own thinking process here. So that's really kind of what I'm kind of looking from you for. So, all right. So any further questions? I won't ask you for any more numbers right now. So I go from there. But if anybody has any comments, that's fine. All right. So time-wise. All right. We're doing...
I have a question. What
Yeah.
are we discussing? Because I know I came in late. And so what are we discussing?
Sure. We're talking about the final, the final paper, final reflection paper that is required.
The
So
final one. Okay.
Yeah. So what I would suggest you do, Teresa,
Uh-huh.
is I'll post this lecture. You can
Okay.
actually watch the first, I know
Okay.
you came in about 20 minutes late. You can
Okay.
watch the first 20 minutes and then you'll be able to catch up.
Okay. No problem.
I'll be there for you.
Okay.
So, and that's one of the reasons I always record these. It's kind of, if you want to go back to something that I was said, I mean, you can watch the whole thing, but you can also sort of fast forward through it and get to the point that you want. So
Okay.
all right. So all things being equal, I want to move on to the notion of compassion. So did everybody watch Joan Halifax's video? Okay. If you didn't, go back and watch it. It's only like 15 minutes, I think. So it's pretty quick. And I think it's actually quite good.
Is that the lady?
Yep, that's the
Yeah,
lady.
I watched it. Yeah, I that was good. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's good. So
Yeah.
what I want you to do, what I want to start with here is that I want you to write kind of a one paragraph, few sentence, and keep it short, definition of compassion. I want you to write it in the chat, but I don't want you to submit it until I say so. So in other words, it's not a race. Everybody can take a few minutes to write. I'll let you do that. And then I will have you submit them so I can kind of look through them and we can sort of talk about them, and juxtapose that against the definition and some of the definitions that were in there. And that will be kind of our starting point for our discussion on compassion. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. I'm actually
And what are we writing?
The definite, how you would define what compassion is.
Okay.
Your definition of it. So there are no right or wrong answers here, well, unless you say compassion is like killing your neighbor. I suppose that would be the answer. But there are no right or wrong answers. I'm going to mute my computer and I'm going to kind of shut my camera off so you don't have to look at me while you're doing this. And I'm just going to give you some time to do it. And then I'll pop back on and sort of we'll see where we are. So I will be here, but I will disappear from your site. So I'm going to let you go, but don't submit it till I say so. So don't kind of get, just don't get ahead of yourself. So we'll go from there. So I'll give you a few moments. All right, how we doing? All right, so are you guys pretty much ready? All right, so put that in the chat and let's see what we got. I'll let all of those get there, and then I'll kind of start to read through them a little bit, and we'll kind of go from there. All right, so oh, excuse me. Kimberly writes, having the ability to think outside of your own reality, being able to dig deeper in a space of concern for someone else's situation while offering results, that both cause a person to release, but also get up with your added strength and support. All right. So that's good. Thinking outside of your own reality. It's interesting. I think that what happens when we talk about compassion is we mix it up with empathy and altruism, which are similar kinds of things. Compassion is mostly about us. I don't think it's really about, offering results. I don't see it as something that is necessarily result oriented. It's really about a little bit more about feeling oriented and really about feeling for another person's situation, suffering, anxiety, whatever, as opposed to worrying about or thinking about a result oriented thing. And so what's interesting here is when I think about compassion, is I think about it, I think from a very, if you will, Eastern kind of Buddhist perspective, where results are not something that they focus on. Where in the Western world, which is where we live, we tend to be more outcome and result oriented about success. So one of the things I would ask you to do is think about how to let go of that focus on outcome and results. Not that we don't want good results, but they can sometimes hinder. And just kind of try to remember that, and we'll try to talk more about that, because I think that's something that kind of happens. All right. So Sharmista writes, showing some that you care without being judgmental. So being non-judgmental is a critical piece of this, and we'll certainly talk more about that. But certainly, showing concern or care, or I would say even more than showing, I would probably think about acting in a manner that is caring, and certainly without judgment is critical. So compassion really is about reining our judgment in. I think, Sharmista, that's a really key thing to kind of put in there. Here is Chanel writes, understanding and showing care for a person, for how, sorry, I can't even read anymore, for how a person is feeling or what they are going through. Okay, so again, this sort of, is, understanding, that's more a little bit about empathy, where compassion is really just about accepting and connecting. Understanding can be a part of that. But again, it's almost more primary, is just kind of trying to connect. So it's almost more foundational or fundamental. Certainly, feeling for what a person is going through, but I would say I would use the word more for their experience. Okay, so I think about it from an experiential standpoint in there. So Jaleesa, you use compassion as the ability to empathize. So it is, to an extent, with or share sympathies. I don't know if I would say sympathy is a part of it. I struggle with the idea of sympathy, almost like the feeling for somebody, as to opposed to feeling with somebody. And I think compassion is more about the with part than the for part. So that's kind of the way I see it. You know, again, you talk about judgmental, and I think that is a critical piece of this. So that's two people who mentioned it, and I think in both cases, I would want to emphasize that. And compassionate individuals usually offer some form of support. So what I would say is compassion in and of itself is supportive, right? So think about this for a moment, right? This I think is important because again, you know, when you say offer support, that's a very active thing. But I think just being able to convey compassion feels supportive. So think about it in your own world, right? When you feel someone is compassionate towards you, that is a positive feeling. Is that right? I mean, would you agree? So again, just the act in and of itself, sometimes just being able to do it without having to do anything else, but conveying that is supportive, right? Again, this is where we are taught, I think, very much that we have to do. And there's nothing wrong with doing. I mean, I'm asking you to do stuff and to be actively involved in your learning, right? But in showing compassion, sometimes it's that can in and of itself be supportive. And from there, then you can do other things, right? So it's kind of like layering, right? So that's a way to think about it. Amber writes, I feel like compassion is when you realize what somebody else is going through and feel for them and want to help them. Empathize definitely leads to compassion or being compassionate. So, you know, again, you know, you're right that you want to help them, right? So I think that people who are compassionate are naturally wanting to help. We are helpers, and right, you're all here because you want to be a helper. But again, if you can separate that out and think about compassion in a sense as a verb and an action on its own, and then you again can build off of that, right? So if we're breaking it down, almost sort of deconstructing kind of what we're doing in the helping process, that's your starting point, right? It's about really first being that. You know, so I think that's important. Compassion is showing a person that you care, and is willing to be helpful when they are going through a situation. Showing love. Pity is a word that I don't like. Again, and the reason is it to me, pity, and again, this is sort of how I understand it. It may not be how you meant it, and that's fine. But pity is almost a looking down at somebody. You know, I feel bad for you. And so it can come across a little bit in a condescending kind of way. So you want to be careful with that, right? Because that implies a judgment. And so we want to be careful with that. It certainly is showing love. I 100% would agree that is a demonstration of love in the larger sense, right? In a more spiritual way, I guess would be a way to put it. And certainly attaching to somebody's suffering. And when I talk about suffering, and I think this is important, I think suffering, when we think about suffering, we typically think about something really bad. When I think about suffering, I think about struggle. And the difference is that we all suffer because we all struggle. We all go through difficult times. The essay I wrote, the reflection I wrote, is about suffering. Now, I may not be suffering in the sort of conventional way that we think about it. You know, I wasn't in pain. I wasn't, you know, feeling like my whole world was going to fall apart. I mean, it wasn't that kind of suffering. But so, you know, again, when we think about suffering, think about it in a bigger way where it is about the struggle and to get through life, we have to engage with that. It's just part of our experience, right? Because I'm guessing everybody in this room, myself included, has had struggles. We have all struggled. So from that perspective, we have experienced suffering and we can learn from that experience and we can use that to be compassionate, right? So we can use that towards our compassion. So again, another with pity. So I talked about pity and my feeling about that word. And again, Teresa, you may not have meant it exactly in the way that I'm defining it, but just kind of think about that a little bit. It's tender and love, and I would agree with that. And I do, it is an inherent human quality. And I think Joan Halifax talks about that, and other people talk about that. We have it. We can deny it. We can turn it off. We can have external things turn it off. But I think it is there in all of us. So that's good. And Kelsey writes, compassion is providing sympathy for a person's well-being. So I think compassion is that we provide just because we provide it. How do I want to say that? In other words, it is just something that's a connection to the human experience, right? And by doing it, it can support someone's well-being. And if we have some time today, I have some stuff about well-being I want to talk about. We may not get to it, but if we have some time, I will talk about it. So I'm kind of glad you raised the specter of well-being, Kelsey. So thank you for doing that. You're right. Everyone comes from a different walks of life, and that's true. Inquiring sympathy to what a person is willing to talk about offers support. Sometimes we can show compassion, and I think this is something to think about, without really having to use words or to talk specifically about what someone is going through. I think compassion can be conveyed in many ways. And so, just think about it, and words are one of them. Certainly, it's not that's not the case. But people don't always have to be willing to talk about something for you to show compassionate, because we can sense, right? I'm sure you would all agree with this. And if you don't, you can tell me. But you can sense when something is not going well for another person, right? And sometimes you can show compassion. Compassion can be shown in a lot of ways. So it doesn't even it doesn't require the other person to even want to share what's going on. You can sort of, in a sense, like Carl Rogers talks about with unconditional positive regard, you can just show that compassion knowing somebody is struggling, right? So that's kind of another way to sort of do this. So that it can have a lot of power in that way. It doesn't require you to know. So that's, I think, a positive way to look at this. Let's see what else we got here. Referring to a place such as work environment, place of employment. Okay. Okay, Kim writes that she understands. Amber needs to step out. Yeah, you good. That's fine. Gotcha. You're good. Okay. Oh, well, difficult situation. Amber is trying to show compassion, I'm sure, for the situation that she wrote about in the in there. So, all right. So that's good. So that's, I want to go back a little bit, and so bear with me here. So I got to get back to these other notes I wrote. And okay. So in module 2, David Brandon, who wrote the book about Zen and the Art of Helping, he writes about compassion in this way. So think about kind of how you were thinking about it when you wrote what you wrote, and maybe how you're thinking about it after we've talked about it a little bit. So you've got kind of moment A, moment B, and now this is kind of moment C, right? So David Brandon writes, compassion means giving people room, opening doors rather than closing them, asking questions rather than giving answers. It means becoming sensitively aware of another person's situation and feelings. It means listening with your whole being and giving, if you can, what is relevant and appropriate to a relationship without self-consciously measuring what it is. So and then he kind of goes on to say, compassion is the process of deep contact with the primordial source of love. It is the direct communication from the innermost recesses of one's existence. So let's look at that definition. You guys kind of touch on this. I mean, I think in what you wrote, you sort of hit on this, but he's emphasizing some things that are not so much actions in the same way. So number one, compassion means giving people room. So what it tells you is we don't push, right? We will help people get ready to talk about what they want to talk about, but we don't push. So let me sort of go back to sort of critical reflection now and your own reflections that you're going to do. So when you write about what you write about, what I'm telling you is give yourself compassion, right? Give yourself the room and the time it takes to think about what it is you're reflecting on, right? And when working with other people, right, it's about not pushing the process. One of the mistakes I think that people make who are new to the helping process is they are anxious to do good, which is a great characteristic, right? We want that. But sometimes we move too fast for people. And compassion means understanding how quickly you can move and how you can move the process along in a compassionate manner. Okay? I know these can be sometimes tricky concepts to sort of get, because it sometimes feels like I'm talking in circles with this. But I think if you kind of give yourself and immerse yourself in these ideas, you will understand it because you have experienced this. This is within your experience, I think. You just haven't really kind of processed it in the same way that we're doing it here. So that would be what I would say. So it's about opening doors rather than closing them. So, a lot of you or some of you wrote about, helping and getting people results. What he's talking about here and what I was trying to get at is what you're doing is you're opening the door for people to be able to feel, talk, process, do whatever they need to do with what's happening in them. In a sense, you are giving permission. And your presence by being non-judgmental and showing empathy and those things, those help open doors, right? Asking questions rather than giving answers, right? So a lot of times what people will talk about is that, the helping process is about giving advice. And at times that is true. I'm not going to say it's not, because we offer suggestions at times, but really compassion is about helping someone explore their own feelings. Critical reflection is about helping someone explore their own feelings. You can, in ways, teach people how to reflect on their own experience through the helping process, and that's an act of compassion because you're helping them understand their own experience, right? I think everybody here can relate to the idea that things happen to us, and we don't always understand them. We don't always know how to make sense of them. And sometimes things happen in rapid succession. So we get overwhelmed by them. We don't know how to make sense of it. We're not sure how to make sense of it. It doesn't seem to make sense, however you want to look at it. When we're showing compassion and when we are helping, we are asking questions rather than giving answers. We're letting the person and helping them figure this out for themselves. Because who's the most powerful person in your life? It's you, right? So when you are able to do this, you are a better helper. That's the relationship. When we talk about the helper has to be well, you're well when you can do these things because you're in touch with it yourself. So it doesn't mean that you can't ever feel pain, have issues, have problems, that's all part of life. Asking someone to not have those things, be able to be a helper is ridiculous. It's not something you can do. But if you can understand these concepts and do this for yourself, you're so much more empowered to help somebody else out. And if you can have experiences with people as a helper and go back and reflect on them, the next time you will have more skill to be compassionate, right? It works in a loop. So, we can go from there. It talks about, it means becoming sensitively aware of another person's situation and feelings. A lot of you kind of talked about that, keying into what the person is going through. A couple of you talked about it in a non-judgmental manner. I think he's implying that. I think it's good that you said that, right? Because if you make a judgment about a person's situation or feelings, then your ability to be compassionate starts to close down. Because now you are saying that's bad, that's good, that's whatever it is. Now you may walk away and think, wow, that's a bad thing to do. That's a bad thought to have. That's a poor judgment that you made in this action. And you have to separate that out, because what you have to think is, okay, that's my belief, but I'm not going to let that color how I see the person in the situation. I'm going to be able to separate that out. That's not an easy thing to do. And I guarantee you that there are times when you will engage with people and you will fail at that. And what I would tell you is that's okay. You don't have to ever feel like you have to be perfect. What you have to be able to do is you have to go back and be able to examine that and understand why that is and how to be better at it, how to grow from it as you go forward. You are, and I probably said this last week, I'll say it again, I'll probably say it next week too, and the week after. As humans, we are all flawed. We are flawed. We are imperfect. We are unfinished. And what I would say to you is accept it. The thing you shouldn't accept is that you're a finished product and that those flaws are permanent and that there's not something that, you should never give in to the focus of that's just the way I am. If there's something that you're uncomfortable with in your own being, which will happen, what you have to do is accept that that's the way I acted at this moment. And that is not necessarily always going to be who I am. I can grow, right? And so because helping is about helping others grow. If we don't understand the process in ourselves, it makes it hard to understand the process in somebody else. My wife, when my kids were little, my kids are all grown. Some of them are older than you. Not all of you, but some of you. When they would do something bad, any child, anybody who's a mom or has been around kids or whatever, they do stuff that they shouldn't do. That's what kids do, right? And she used to tell them is that you're a good person that did a bad thing, right? That was the message, right? Very concrete message. Basically saying to them that sometimes we do things that are not okay, but that doesn't color your whole personality as who you are. And you can learn to be better, right? That's compassion, right? So that's, when we think about that. And again, he goes on to say, it means listening with your whole being and giving. So this is really important. We listen verbally. What he's talking about here is we really listen with our whole selves. And this is going to be a hard thing to maybe explain to you what he means by that, but it's with our feeling, with our kind of spiritual being, with all that we are, right? We give it our whole, we're giving our whole self to hearing what's going on. So, that takes work and practice. And he says, what is relevant and appropriate to a relationship without self-consciously measuring what it is. So this is sort of another non-judgmental thing to me. We're just in it. We're not in it to get anything out of it. We're not in it to, feel good about ourselves. That could be an offshoot that we feel that we did a good thing, what we in the Jewish religion refer to as a mitzvah, a righteous act. But we're not doing it to get anything out of it. In a sense, and I think this is important, we're doing a good act because it's a good act to do. We're engaged in a righteous action because that is who we are, because compassion lives inside of us. And that's pure. And compassion is a pure thing. And we're trying to get to that sense of purity in there. And he talks about deep contact with the primordial sense of love and so on and so forth. So that's how he defines compassion. We've talked about critical reflection. I'm going to try to connect the two a little bit for you here. And then we'll I'll get some feedback from you. But the idea is that what I'm trying to help you do is understand really how to get at your own core through critical reflection, whatever that is. Because if you can get there, your ability to show compassion will increase. So your ability to be successful as a helper, that core, most foundational thing that there is, will live inside of you. And then everything else, when you learn technique and theory and all that stuff, you will be laying that on top of compassion. If you don't, and I think this happens sometimes, where it happened for me because nobody ever taught me this stuff when I was in school. What happens is you get overly focused on what theory to use, what technique to use, and all that. And that's important, but that has to lay on top of compassion. It's kind of like if you build a house, every house needs a roof, because otherwise when it rains, you're going to get wet. Nobody wants that. But you don't build a roof first, because if you did, I don't think that would work, right? So you want to sort of think about it that way. All right, so I've kind of talked at you for a while. So what I'd like to do is I'd like for you to kind of give me some feedback on what you're hearing, okay, in any way that you can. So, I'm gonna kind of walk through my screen a little bit. Help me understand if this makes sense to you, or if you think I'm just some crazy old guy spurting kind of wacky theories. That's okay too. People have told me that. I'm comfortable with that. But kind of how this connects. So I'm going to start with Sharmista because you're on the top left-hand corner of my screen, so you're in the number 1 slot. So go ahead. Help me out here.
I do believe that this is starting to make some sense. I am thinking about what you said the last video that we did, that we don't have to write our paper as if we are writing as we're getting our doctorate degree. So I'm thankful for that. So yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, Amber missed a lot of what I said, so I'm not going to put her on the spot. So I'm going to go to Kelsey because she's next in line.
Sorry, it didn't want to unmute.
That's okay.
Yeah, so yeah, you pretty much put everything in order because I always misunderstood empathy and compassion, or sympathy and compassion. So that's a good way to look at it. And as far as how to utilize both and when to act and when to limit. But my biggest issue with compassion,
Mhm.
I have a tendency of going overboard and not knowing where to draw the line.
Mm.
So what will
So-
be an
Well,
accurate?
I think you'd have to talk to me a little bit more about that so I can understand how that looks for you before I could give you kind of a response. I think that would be helpful.
Okay.
So help me understand a little bit more, kind of how that kind of manifests itself for you.
So like currently I'm in home health and hospice care. And a lot of my clients have a tendency of getting attached. So if it's a workplace, I let them know at the beginning, it's a workplace environment. Hey, we have to keep this professional. But like one of my clients, she lost her mom at the beginning of the year, actually the same day I lost my last boyfriend.
Mhm.
And she doesn't have any family here. So, and also she kind of looks at me like as if I'm her family member.
Mhm.
Um, and I try to let her know, hey, I'm still just your caregiver at the moment. But from March up until now, like she would not let anyone else come into her house. Everybody that comes, they don't last. So what will be the proper direction as far as where can I lead her to let her know, hey, because everything I've told her, she doesn't care.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So she has needs that she's expressing to you, and you have connected with her clearly.
Right.
Right. So, I think in that kind of situation, so I would say the first thing that you have to do is in your own mind, which I think you are, just from the way you've explained this, is that you have to understand the boundaries of the relationship. And so once you understand them, then you can support movement for her to connect with other people, right? So, when she may talk to you and I don't know the situation, so I'm going to, just kind of give examples that may or may not be exactly relevant. But when you know that she won't see anybody else and those kind of things, that what you want to sort of let her know is that, it's important to allow others into your life. I think that's important. And, we have to understand that in my role, that, this is all that I can do. So I don't want to, in other words, you don't want to give someone a false sense
Right.
of kind of what the relationship is. But what you want to say is, I do hear and care about what you're feeling. I hear that you're lonely, or I hear that you feel connected to me. I hear that you're struggling, and it's good that you're connected, but it's also important that you connect to others, because it's the kind of, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. I wouldn't quite say that to her.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of, you can have that ongoing conversation in the process of all the other conversations you have. So in other words, you don't have to worry about the outcome. What you want to do for yourself is you want to know that you've had clear boundaries and you've expressed them, and you have sort of not enabled her in this process of glomming on too much to you. And that when other opportunities exist that you can help her in terms of talking about connecting to others, that you have kind of opened that door for her and kind of have those kinds of conversations. This is a common thing. You will, number one, a lot of people, I'm sure that's true for people in this room, as helpers, that boundary can be hard because you really want to do good. I mean, it's really in your heart. It's a real thing. It's not a, it's not put on. It's very authentic for people who go into this. So but you have to think about, helping is also about boundaries. It's part of the process. And I think you understand that because you're talking about it. So I think that's clear in your mind. So you're in a sense, you may not feel this, but I would sense that you're already halfway there because you have the recognition that's there. It's harder, and for other people to hear this, when you don't have that recognition, that when you're kind of all the way there.
Mhm.
So yeah, you can have that close relationship, but you can do other things inside of that, if that makes any sense.
Got it.
Yeah. So the hospice thing is, very near and dear to my heart because I am a hospice client, not so much me. But I'm sure that when you're dealing with hospice, you're dealing with the whole family system. It's not just the person. So my mom, we have hospice care, and we have we have aides and nurses and volunteers that are coming in and out of our house all the time. So I'm sort of on the receiving end of that. And we talk very frankly with these people, and I bear some of this emotion out there, but I also try to remember that this is a service, and I think people are really good at maintaining those boundaries, and we don't always have to sort of talk about them. We have to sort of lead into those kinds of things. So hopefully that's helpful.
Well, I think it's mainly because she doesn't have any family. And
Yeah.
so she's in a state alone, well, with her father, like he's in another state. And like I said, with her mom, they have no one. So it's like,
Yeah, no, it's a difficult situation. And yeah, I mean, I would certainly have conversations and try to open her up to the idea of, let's get some other people in here. That's a healthy thing. And that you support that and you think it's good. It doesn't mean that you won't still talk to her. I mean, sometimes people glom onto one thing because of fear of, I've got this, I don't want to lose it. And again, I don't know this person, so I don't want you to think that that's it. But that is a dynamic, right? I got something, it's mine, and I'm going to protect it. So I think you have to work inside of that sort of framework, which I feel like from the way you're talking about it, you get that,
right.
which I think that is really important.
Okay.
Okay. So Chanel, I put you on the spot before, so we're going to just skip over to Lakeitha and let her respond. So we'll kind of go from there. Lakeitha, comments, thoughts? How is this sort of kind of, if you will, connecting with you?
Um, it's actually helping me to open that compassion side of me back up. The field that I work in, when I started 17 years ago, a nurse that had been there for several years told me that you must close that part of your heart off, working in the operating room, because if you don't, you will go home with that every night of everything that happens in that OR, death, different things that are happening that are out of your control, and it will eat you alive. At first, I thought that was very bad advice when she gave me that advice. But then early on in my career, like the first 2 years, I noticed that I would go home, I would be depressed, I would be crying. What could we have done different? How could we have saved that person? Oh my God, it was just this little bit of thing. The surgery wasn't that bad. It was just something that dwelled on me all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't function with my family or different things with my family because I was, as Ms. Halifax said, I was becoming attached to the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to learn how to release that. So listening to her yesterday really helped me to understand that I can, still be compassionate without being attached to the outcome. So it's really helping me to understand that part of, of compassion.
Good. I think that's great. So, well, Jaleesa, I put on the spot before, so I'm going to go right to Teresa, and ask you to respond. You have to unmute though, because otherwise we won't be able to hear you.
I have compassion in the past, but by me watching the videos and learning about this class, I open up more to being more compassionate because, like I said in the last video, our last class meeting, because of what I experienced in my life, I lost a lot of compassion for people.
Okay, little hard to hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Oh yeah, way better. Yeah,
Okay, all right. Did you hear anything I said?
little bit, but if you can just sort of kind of.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I wasn't compassionate because of because of some of the things that I went through in life. And I talked about that in our last class.
Mhm.
But since I've been in the class and looking over the videos, now I understand really what compassion is. And I just hope that, that I can gain that sense of, you know,
Mm.
yeah.
So, and thank you. And obviously, if Jaleesa or Chanel have anything they want to add, I don't want to not give you the opportunity. So if there's something you want to say, please, or Amber too. I know you kind of missed some of our discussion, but if you guys want to add anything in, please just let me know, and you're more than welcome to offer your thoughts. Okay, you guys look happy where you are, so we'll go with that. That's good. So, yeah, so again, I think a couple of things I'll say, and we're getting close to the end of the class. So I might put some, well, let me say this first, then I'll get because I got a couple of things. So compassion is the kind of thing that we never stop learning, right? We work at greater understanding of it, I think, throughout our lives. I mean, we can have compassion, we can be compassionate, but situations will always test us, and life and the struggle of life tests us, and we come to new understandings of these things. So again, you really just want to be open to it, which if you grow or evolve in your thinking of it, doesn't mean you didn't understand it now. It just means you understand it in a different way as you go forward, and that's okay. That's a good thing. That's in a sense what wisdom is. Wisdom is about continually taking in what you take in to learn new things about concepts you thought you understood or did understand, but now understand them in a fuller way. So that's what about reflection is. So one of the things I'm trying to teach you that I think is so critically important is the idea that in terms of your own personal and professional development, these are ongoing things we are always working on. And we can come to new insights in them, and that's fantastic. Again, we're never kind of a finished product. So that's one thing. The second thing I'll say is I found actually today some kind of exercises. Is a kind of a little handbook I found. Woman did this, I forget where, not my work, it's her work. But so I may kind of toss that out there if I get a chance and have you and incorporate that, or have you take a look at that in terms of the class when we look at compassion and kind of ongoing. I'm not really sure how I can integrate that into class. So I'll do what I can, and I'll try to do that because I think there's value in it. The last thing I just want to mention, and I will put this video up, is to talk a little bit about well-being. Somebody in their stuff talked about well-being, but I watched a video about well-being, and the guy who talks about it is a neuroscientist, and it's from the University of Wisconsin. And what they do is they look at the neuroscience of well-being. And he talks about what he calls 4 constituents of well-being. We don't have nearly enough time to talk about this now, so I just want to introduce it. And I'll post the video. It's 13 minutes, so it's not a long video. And have him talk about that, and to think about what comprises well-being. When he talks about what comprises well-being, he talks about it from the perspective of that it's a skill that you can learn, and that there's neuroscientific research on the brain that demonstrates the benefit of it and how it works, that they can see that. I mean, I am not a neuroscientist, so I'm not going to try to explain this, but they look at different portions of the brain and whatnot. And to start to think about it in the framing of your own perspective, what well-being is, because maybe next week what we'll do is we'll start with defining well-being, talk about it, and look at this. I'll have to see what's on my agenda. And again, because everything I teach you about you are things that you can use in the helping process when you start to work with others, right? So it helps you, It helps you be better at what you do. It helps give you the foundation again to put the technique and the theory and all that other stuff and lay it on top of that, and then make you the helper that you want to be, the authentic helper that you want to be. Because what I really want to help you do is to be a helper, and I use that word very generically, whatever role you take, but that has to come from your authentic self, right? Those two things have to emerge. Or shouldn't say this, we're at our best when we're acting authentically inside of the knowledge that we get. So I'll leave you with that thought. Any final questions or thoughts? Okay, well, I hope you found the last 90 minutes to be of value, and start to work on these reflections. If you write something and you want some feedback from me, you can send it. I'll do the best I can to give you that feedback. I'm okay with that. Again, there's a lot of stuff that comes at me. So again, I'll do the best that I can in trying to get it back to you. But hopefully that's something we can do, and have yourself a great week. And again, I hope that the class and the time you've spent here was of value, and you'll see stuff. You obviously know I post stuff all the time on the course, so you can, just keep an eye on it as things come on there, and we can go from there. So I'll say goodbye, and everybody have a great week.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you. Good night. Goodbye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Good night.